Well, I'm going to ask you now, speaking of going back in time, do you remember the first time that you saw Times Square?
Oh, yes. My mother and I came from Seattle, Washington, and she did a very clever thing. We took a train down the West Coast down to New Orleans, then got on a little cruise ship called the Dixie and came into the New York harbor, and I saw the Statue of Liberty coming into New York, which was thrilling. And of course, the first thing we did was to go downtown and see Broadway and Times Square.
Do you remember what kind of shows were running when you first came in, like when you were studying at the neighborhood playhouse and things, what shows you'd see?
The group theater was very big in those days. And of course, I saw Golden Boy. And interestingly enough, my husband, Larry Parks, was working at the group theater studio at the same time I was at the neighborhood playhouse, but we never met in those days. We studied from the same teachers, we knew all the same people, but unless we met and didn't make any impression on each other, I don't know. But when we first were there, we lived in a little apartment in Tudor City, and actually it was a one-room apartment with two other would-be actresses. And it was one room with a covered kitchen, and they went to bed on the studio couch, which let out, and my mother and I were in the Inador Murphy bed. So there was no room for anybody to do anything else but go to bed. So we didn't have an ironing board for 2 years, and ironing boards were about $3.95, and theater tickets were $1.10 a piece. It was sitting way up in the balcony, but it was only $1.10. The high price seats were $6.60, I think. But whenever we wanted to get an ironing board, my mother would say, should we get an ironing board or should we go to the theater? And I'd say, let's go to the theater. So I used to iron on the floor with, doing stretches with my legs out like this and iron on the floor. The first musical I ever saw was On Your Toes with Ray Bolger, Vera Zorina, the ballet dancer, but it was a magical show. It was Rodgers and Hart and had Slaughter on 10th Avenue in it. But the first play I ever saw, I think, was Golden Boy was one of the first things I saw, because we were studying the Stanislavski system, so naturally we had to see anything that the group theater did. And Golden Boy was a fabulous production. Francis Farmer and Luther Adler. It was made into a movie later. But
Martha Graham taught at your school, right? At neighborhood class when you were there?
Martha Graham taught. I worked with Martha, and I ended up being in Martha's group for one season. Martha was funny. She was an inspiring woman. And then Martha's assistant, Anna Sokolow, was a real tough cookie. And she used to call me puddin'-faced virgin. And the greatest compliment she paid me after a year working with her, she looked at me one day and she said, "You really work hard, don't you?" And I went, oh, she finally is appreciating me. But Sandy was a tough cookie too. And he could be very mean. And one day I'd finished doing a scene and he said, "All right, now, go back out there, come back in and do it right." And I went out on the hallway and I'm practically in tears. And I don't know what I've done was wrong, but because I was almost in tears, I came back and I was angry. I did this scene, and then he said, "Now that's right." So we all went to lunch, and Danny Mann, the great director, was also in my class. And Danny said, "You know what Sandy said when you left the room?" And I said, "What?" And he said, Sandy said, "Now that's talent." And I said, "Why didn't he ever say that to me?" But that was Sandy. Sandy would never give you an inch. But he was a fabulous teacher, really great teacher. So even when he was mean, I liked him.
Was there a scene then of actors who were all in the same boat as you were, all looking for work? Like, where did you congregate? Where did you spread the word of what shows were?
Actors are very generous people, I find. in spite of the stories about jealousy and everything. Walgreens drugstore on Broadway was where everybody hung out and gave tips to each other what was being cast and where to go to try to get a job. I was not very good at doing the rounds, as they called it. My mother used to say, "Now why aren't you doing the rounds like the other actors are?" It was such a humiliating thing to walk into an office. You usually didn't get very nice treatment from the secretaries. They'd brush you off and say, "Yes, well, Mr. So-and-so is busy right now, and will you leave your name and your..." I don't think you even left picture and resume in those days, but you left your name and hopefully got an appointment. If there was something casting, once in a while, the producer would be generous enough to read people, but I never got a job by reading.
Did you go out after the shows? You were young, you were single. Were you going to the hangouts? Where did people go? Were you I mean, you were starring in Broadway shows. What did you do when the curtain went down?
I wasn't starring in shows for a long time. I was in shows. My first show was Orson Welles' Mercury Theater, and I was a backstage voice. And then I was in shows where I was just featured and had small parts. It wasn't until I was in Call Me Mr. that I actually starred. I was featured in shows before, but Call Me Mr. was one of the most exciting opening nights I've ever had. The minute that curtain opened and the first number went, you felt that the audience was seeing something different and was excited about it. You could just feel it. And so we got raves on that. But always, and to this day, I cannot go home after a show. When I was doing shows and, you know, doing pretty well, doing featured parts and everything, we would get home. Usually, most of the cast would end up at my house, which was on 52nd Street and 8th Avenue. It was a wonderful apartment. And my mother would make scrambled eggs and we'd have drinks and just have a wonderful time. I never went to bed before 3 o'clock in the morning. To this day, I can't go to bed before 3. But there were hangouts. Our favorite hangout was a place called Ralph's. It was on 45th Street. But Ralph was a man who loved actors. And he would let you come in and sit there all night with a cup of coffee. He even put some actors who didn't have a place to stay, let them stay upstairs on a little cot or something. He was very kind to all of us. So you would gather there naturally every night after a show, or even if you weren't doing a show, that's where you went to hang out with other actors.
Did you go to Sardi's and things like that?
Oh yes, you went to Sardi's if you had enough money. And you could always, Sardi's you could sort of hang out too. Sardi's bar used to be right in the window of Sardi's. So you could go and sit at the bar and look out at the street and greet everybody that came into Sardi's. But we went on the road, and of course that was a ball. I used to love the road. Call Me Mr., I think we played New Haven, Boston, Philadelphia, but it was wonderful, and we got a chance to make a lot of changes, and it was a happy show to begin with. So to be on the road was, you know, we were all fairly young, and you just had a ball.
But was it in the 40s, 50s, was it the golden age of Broadway, do you think?
I don't think we were aware of that at all. Looking back, I think it is.
I'm going to ask you one last question, if you don't mind. And two things happened in the 50s, especially out here. Mm-hmm. The blacklist and the end of the Hollywood musical. Mm-hmm. Did more people go to New York to work on stage? Did it affect, how did the blacklist and the end of the musicals and what was happening?
Well, certainly the blacklist. And, all right, certainly the blacklist hurt the careers of a great many people. And most of the actors who had been Broadway actors, New York actors, who'd come out here, went back because there was nothing for them here anymore. And there was no blacklist in the theater, thank God. Larry and I, it saved Larry's and my life because we were able to take a show on the road. We were able to play summer stock every summer, even after the blacklist hit us. We were able to put together a variety act or a vaudeville act and played Las Vegas. There was no blacklist in Las Vegas, which is interesting. And we were able to go to England and play the Palladium. We were able to keep working outside of film. Larry never did work in film until the last picture he made, which was Freud. Certainly, it drove a lot of actors away from Hollywood. There was nothing they could do if they were blacklisted. I'll never understand the death of musicals in movies. When I made My Sister Eileen, I went out on a press tour, and we would get to a city, and the distributors and the theater owners would meet us at a cocktail party, and then there'd be publicity about that picture that was opening. And I had these guys come up to me and say, "Don't mention it's a musical." I went, "Don't mention it's a musical, why?" I said, "Because musicals are death in the box office." I never understood what happened that the public stopped buying musicals. Maybe they became too frivolous for the times, when times were maybe getting heavy and serious, and people just thought they were silly. What's interesting now is everybody loves them, and they're on videotapes and people play them, and everybody says they don't make movies like that anymore. I'll never understand why it happened that they just stopped making those musicals. I don't know, because I was sort of out of it then. I wasn't there at the studios or anything because I was blacklisted too. So it.
So you were doing TV and touring.
I did the touring and summer stock and whatever we could do. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that I was able to do TV. But when I went to New York to do Spoon River Anthology with, it was a show that grew out of Theater West with Joyce Van Patten and Charles Aidman and Robert Elston and Naomi Carroll and Hal Lynch. The 6 of us went to New York. We did Spoon River, I think, for $13,000.
And that was only the 70s, right?
Yeah, and of course that was a very economical show because it was 4 benches and 2 musicians and a backdrop, which was beautifully lit, but there's no such thing as that kind of cost nowadays. We got unanimous reviews, and that was one of the most exciting nights of my life because we went to New York to do Spoon River as a concert tour. We expected to go for 4 weeks, and I think we stayed 6 months. It was just a glorious time.
Wow. When you were going to Ralph's and Desartes sometimes, back during Call Me Mister and VI Sing and Laughing Room Only, those times,
Yeah.
did you ever look around, like come out of your stage door or anything, or on your way in and look around at Times Square and say, "My God, I'm working at the most important time in the history of this business"?
Well, I don't know that so much, is that I remember moments where I would sit backstage waiting for a cue. Or in one show, Jackpot, I remember this so well. We had a crazy scene where a bunch of us were hiding in haystacks. And I was sitting in this haystack all huddled up. And I remember saying to myself, this is the happiest moment of my life. This is what I always wanted to do, and I'm doing it. That's happened to me several times in my life, particularly in the theater.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, my dear.
You're wonderful.
You're a wonderful interviewer.
Oh, thank you very much. I try to do my homework,
Well,
but it's a pleasure with you.
You
It's
kick
not
me
work.
off into, as you can see, I can just talk forever.
Oh, well, my gosh. We're not going to rush this. This is too important.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
You're very welcome.